Hi, it's Sheila Guffey here with Creative Aging. Today we're going to do some acrylic painting and we're going to work small. So we might do a bookmark, or if you have a small canvas that you'd like to use at home, you can do that. And we're going to do palm trees. This is a really good way to practice using small point brushes. So this is the kind of thing that does take practice, and this is the perfect project because it's very repetitive. And so we're gonna do a lot of layers of different greens to create this palm tree, and then notice there's quite a few shades of brown. Okay, and for the example, we're gonna do a sunset. So if you wanna do just flat, one color behind it, you're welcome to do that. Or if you wanna play with some colors and do something brighter, then you can do that as well. So for this project, you're gonna need, obviously, acrylic paper cut down. So this was just from a pad of acrylic paper, and I just cut it whatever size I wanted to make my bookmark. If you would rather do a small painting, you can just cut those sheets of acrylic paper in half. Totally up to you. You're gonna need acrylic paint, and you can use, for this project, you can use the craft acrylic, or you can use the fine art acrylic. And honestly, this is the perfect project to notice the difference. So I used a lot of leftover paints that I just had a little bit of. So that's kind of how I choose my colors, is I wanted to use some leftovers so I can buy some new paint. But yeah, so I'm using both. And I recommend that you do the same if you have it, just because then you'll really know the difference between craft acrylic, which is gonna be a little thinner, and these brands gonna be a lot thicker, brighter colors. So this project, though, it doesn't matter. They mix well together, and I don't always recommend you doing that. So this is one that you can play a little bit more. So you'll need the paint, the paper, a few sizes of brushes, definitely a bigger brush. I prefer flat because we're gonna kind of do side to side brush strokes. So a bigger flat brush, couple small brushes with good points. This is what's gonna make this project go very smoothly and a lot easier. And you need a cup of water. We're not gonna use very much water. I recommend that you use very little water for this project, but you might wanna rinse your brush in between changing colors. So keep the water handy and have a paper towel, because you don't want to get this paper that wet, because we're going to be doing so many layers, so you don't want it to get too muddy. You want to keep these separate. So paper towel for if you rinse your brush, then you can blot it and keep painting. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with my big brush, and I'm probably gonna, I don't want it to be too dark, so I'm gonna add a little bit of white to the darkest purple. And I'm gonna start with my darkest color at the top. So if you're doing a sunset, your lightest color is gonna be at the bottom where the sun is setting. Okay, so I'm using a lot of pinks and purples. You're welcome to do whatever color you choose in your sunset. So I'm just gonna grab some of this white, and I'm gonna put it right next to my purple, and then just keep dragging some of this dark purple into the white till I get the color I want. So I want it to be darker than this purple because I already have this one. But I don't want it to be as dark as it was, because you want your tree to be the focus of this painting, so you don't want to have too dark of colors probably for your background. That gets a little tricky. So this would just add a different shade. That'd be pretty to blend. Okay. And depending on how you want the sky to look, you can drag your brush back and forth and make it smooth. Or if you want to move it around, you can do that too. It just kind of depends on what you want your sky to look like. I think I'm just gonna make it smooth for now. think that'd be easier to see the palm tree once we do the top, because we're gonna really do a lot of texture on that palm tree. So I don't want the sky and the palm tree to compete with each other too much. So I'm going to do it a little bit smooth where I'm dragging the colors back and forth. So see, I just added more white there. And so I'm actually really playing. I don't have an exact direction that I'm going with this. I thought it'd be interesting to do it together. So I'm just gonna add colors, and if I don't like them, I'm gonna paint over it. It's no big deal. So I definitely want some pink somewhere in there. So I'm putting more white in between the purple and the pink, and then I'm just gonna lighten that pink, and then I'm gonna lighten the purple. But then I'm gonna drag them into each other too. Kind of looks cloudy. I have this color on my palette that's kind of got a hint of blue in it. I'm gonna try this at the top. See if I like it. And hopefully, I don't know if you can tell even just while I'm painting, that is the fine art acrylic. See how thick it is? It's got a lot more color in it. The pink was the craft acrylic, and see how muted that is? So they are different, but blending them together with this project in particular actually can work out okay. I don't always recommend mixing them. Just depends on the project. So that's really dark. I'm going to drag that down into this a little bit. Got this coral. And these colors, so I picked colors that will mix okay together. So you'll notice I'm not even rinsing my brush in between. I'm using the same brush because I chose these colors to mix together. So depending on if you have other things in mind that won't mix, like if you're doing a lot of blues and yellows in your sunset, then definitely have different brushes, or have your cup of water and rinse it very thoroughly while you're switching colors. And if you also would need a paper towel. So if you use, you rinse your brush in the water, you might want to blot it with a paper towel because you don't want to use a lot of water on this project. So I definitely do not like that. I'm going to switch brushes. And I already have one in water over there. So I'm going to blot that out a little bit. I'm going to go over that with pink down here, and I'm going to use some white on top of that pink too. All right, let's see how this looks. I'm gonna use a little bit more white. I like how it's kind of streaky at the top, so I want the same thing to be at the bottom. So just think about if you wanted to have, if you're liking these colors, keep going. If you don't like these colors, let it dry and paint over them. That's the great thing about acrylic. You don't have to continue doing it, or you can just, you don't have to finish it if you're not liking it. You can just paint over whatever you're doing. I'm going to use a little more purple up here. And so we're gonna have to let this dry before we start doing the palm tree, because that green is not gonna mix well with that purple. So you need your background to totally dry before you start your palm tree. And so what I recommend is while it's drying, maybe practice drawing a palm tree. Figure out exactly the placement where you're gonna want it. And if you want a couple palm trees, you're welcome to do that as well. We're going to be drawing with our paintbrush, but you can still practice on paper if you want to use your pencil and just kind of practice drawing it out just to get ready. I think that's a really good exercise to do while it's drying. And so you can, just figure out if you want it to curve. Do you want it to go off of your page? You can, there's a lot of different things you can do with this. So, if you want to do a couple, if you want it to be straight up and down, this is one that's got a bigger trunk and it's just got a little more wave. So figure out what you want to do and go practice drawing it, and then make sure to touch this and make it so it's totally dry before the next step. Okay, so this is dry. Now I want to use my brown, and I went ahead and got my colors ready. So I have a few shades of green, a little bit of yellow that I might add to this light green to create like a real lime green. And I have a brown and a tan. So you're also welcome to use just brown and white. There's not really a right or wrong on this project, so this is kind of playing with colors. You need to start with, if you have a couple sizes of the point brushes, I'd use the bigger one, because we're going to use the real tiny one for the top of the palm tree. And figure out, so hopefully you practice on a piece of paper the composition of how you want your palm tree to go on the bookmark, so you can figure out how you're going to draw it on there, because you're going to use this like a pencil. And let's just use this dark brown. So press down and slowly, we're going to go over this a few times, so you're going to run out of paint, but just slowly go up and stop, and then, we'll stop at the top, but and I'm going to take my tan or white and let's go alongside it. I'm going to get more. I'm going to get a little more dark up here. And then I'm going to take these colors and move them back and forth. So I'm going to take my brush, and this is going to make it look a little bit more like bark. Give it some texture. So just move it. We're going to do this a few times. We're going to take the light again and we're going to do that the other direction. And I am for sure going to use some white. I don't love that tan, actually. I think it's going to brighten up and look a little better with a little white in it. So art is always, you know, just problem solving. It's really good for your brain to constantly think outside the box and figure out new ways to do things. And so doing art can help you pretty much in any aspect of your life, but don't feel like you have to do it a certain way. Like, you know, I'm constantly changing things. I'm constantly trying to figure out new ways to do it. If I don't like the way it's going, I'm going to change it. And don't be afraid to start over. If you're really not feeling whatever you're doing, like, start over. I am not one to just continue doing something that I'm not having fun with, or I just hate the way it's looking. It's okay. Of course, you know, try reworking it first, but don't be afraid to just start again, because once you know the process, it's almost easier to start over. So see, I'm taking that light and I'm doing more. And then I'm going to take that and go to the other edge. I'm going to go the opposite direction. So I'm still dragging the dark and the light to create kind of almost lines and texture. And so it's going to look a little bit more like a actual tree trunk. I'm going to get some white. I don't need much, but I'm going to add a little. And sometimes I want to get my edge back again, so I will kind of use my paper, you know, my palette, and just roll the brush to where I can get the point perfect. Okay, so you might want to do that every so often, especially with this kind of work, because I'm just getting a tiny, it's hard to see, I know, I'm getting a tiny amount on this paintbrush. So I'm not putting this brush all the way in my paint. I'm just using paint on the very tip of it. All right, so I'm gonna take this white. I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna really figure out, maybe think of it, which direction is your sun coming from. I'm gonna have it come from this way, so maybe this side's gonna have a lot more white on it. So let's do the same thing with the white. And this is where you can fix some of your edges if you got outside the lines. And a lot of painting is kind of going over the same stuff you've already done before. It's all layers. The more layers you have, the better it's going to look in the end. So I'm redipping, and I just got a little tiny bit on the edge again. I'm going to go up here. See, I got outside of that edge right there, so I'm going to fix it. And then I'm going to go this direction. You have to, with a smaller brush, you have to dip it in the paint a lot more. It's not going to hold as much paint, but that's also going to mean you're going to have more control, and every little thing you do matters. So. And you can go back in if there's certain parts that you want darker, you can do that. So I'm going to make a little bit dark, maybe down here. me hold it up so you can see how it's looking. I'm gonna let that dry and I'm gonna work on the top. I'm gonna work on the tree part. And because you can always add more, but I want it to dry because it's just gonna keep blending and the texture is gonna get lost. So sometimes you wanna take a break and move on to another section. And let's, on this, we're gonna start with the lighter green. You can start with the darker. There's definitely no right or wrong on this part. So, same thing though, you wanna use that tip of the brush to kind of draw. So to start, let's draw about, I don't know, 6 or 7. Let's go. This would be just the good guideline to start the shape. And I'm having it go off the page. Okay. So I'm doing the same kind of thing that I did with the tree trunk where I'm going slow and kind of have lots of control. And I'm pressing a little harder now. In a minute, we're not gonna press as hard, so I don't mind it being thick because I'm gonna use that paint. I'm gonna spread it around in a minute. But in a minute, we're gonna use a lot more control to where we have just the fine point. And I want it to look like a really thick, full tree, so I'm doing a lot. Okay, so that's kind of the base. And now let's take the yellow. Let's get some, so we've got this green on the brush. I'm gonna use the same brush because it's gonna mix a little bit into this yellow and create a new shade of green, which I wanted anyway. So I'm just mixing it, using my dirty brush, mixing it into the yellow, which has created just a little bit of a lighter green. And once we go on top of the green we already have, it's gonna mix again. So this is where I kind of got my point back out. I rolled it around on my plate so I have a good point. And just draw tiny little marks going out. And this is gonna look weird for a while. Painting, honestly, paintings come together at the end. They look kind of funky. It's okay. Just takes a while to build it up, and you know. But we're gonna just add some lights, and then we're gonna go back in and we're gonna add some darks. Then we're probably gonna go back in and add more lights and then add more darks. We're gonna do this process a few times. So I'm just going along each one and doing some palms off of the edge. So right there I had a lot more paint, so it just automatically went darker, which is good. But you would not want this to mix with the purple, so you really do need to make sure your background's dry before you do this part. So I'm kind of looking at this as like the base coat. So I know it kind of looks sloppy right now, but it really is just the base of this tree. And then we're gonna add a lot more shades of green and little hints of white, and we'll get it to come together. So see how much I'm dipping into the paint. And if you wanted to start with a dark, you could have done that too. It would have been the same process, doing all of these little lines dark, and then you just would have gone in on top of it with the yellow or the white or a light green. Okay, let's switch colors. Let's see. And what's nice is some of these parts are, I happen to go on thick, and some of them it's not. And so while we're working on it, it's gonna blend pretty nicely. Okay, I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna use the dark. Now this is where you do need to be a little bit more careful. This is really dark. And I may not even like it this dark, so we'll see. This is darker than what I wanted, but it's the paint I had at home, so I'm just gonna go in every couple, and you know, I'm gonna make it darker on the edge, right? So it might be lighter on the tips on the other ends. Don't be afraid to stop every so often and look at what you're doing. So I don't like that. That green is too dark. Let's look at it. So I'm just gonna cover it up with a middle green. And I'm gonna mix this green. I'm gonna mix a little bit of a dark into the first green that I used, because that's just a hair too dark. You may like it, and if you like it, you go for it, but I think it's just a little bit too much. Okay, so that's a mixture. We'll try this. So go along kind of the edge and just add a little bit of dark here and there. And at some point your brush might start getting gunky. It's got too much paint in it, or it's got too much water in it if you've been cleaning it in between. You might want to switch brushes or go clean it out and dry it really well. So this paint is good, and so occasionally it will start getting sticky because we're not using a lot of water for this project. So I went ahead and switched brushes, but I'm going to continue doing the same thing. Your brush should kind of tell you what it needs to do as well, so it's gonna, if it needs some water or if it needs a break, I think you're gonna know. So it is very repetitive. It's just the same kind of movement over and over again with about 3 colors until it starts coming together. And you gotta take your time with this. And really, this project should take you probably an hour and a half at home. I'm gonna go back to the yellow. And I'm gonna just really brighten up some of these edges. And so see how I'm doing less lines. So I did a lot at the beginning, and now I'm really paying attention. I just want to bring out certain parts of it. It's funny, these are the kind of projects that look like they're going to be really, really easy. But it still is a lot of work. I mean, there's definitely, even things that look easy, there's a lot of layers, a lot of paint, a lot of thought. So it's not that this is hard, but it is still a process. Now I'm going to go try that dark again just a little bit. I'm going to do it right in the center where they're kind of all overlapping. I think that it would probably be pretty shadowed there. So just a little bit on the edge. So maybe kind of be careful. You don't want to do too much at this point. So maybe even here, I'm gonna add a couple little dark pieces. So maybe just at the, kind of closer to the middle, I'm gonna add some dark. And this is where you really sometimes need to get this away from your face, because these smaller pieces that you do, you're looking so closely that you can kind of get lost in it, and you need to take a step back sometimes and really look at it from a far away angle, because then you can usually clearly see what you like, don't like, what you want to change. But when you're up close, you can definitely overwork things and get obsessive, or I can for sure. The other teacher we work with, Lee, will tell you that. I sometimes just it's too much, and I have to take breaks, or she has to take it away from me and force a break. Okay, let's look. It's coming together. Yeah, it is for sure. I'm gonna mix a new green. I want a different shade of green. There's a lot of yellow. So I'm gonna use white, and I'm gonna use that first green. So I want a lighter green, but I don't necessarily want it to have so much yellow in it. So I'm gonna cover up some of that yellow. So on the edges, just go in with your lighter green, and if you got a little too much yellow, then that's where you're gonna go over it. You don't want to get rid of it completely, but this is where you really have to take pauses and figure out the last few things that you want to do. I'm gonna add more white. I want it even lighter. And also depending, so because this one is more of a sunset scene, whereas the other one has the blue sky, my palm tree is gonna look different. So you might have more darks, you might want it to be darker than this. Depends on where your where your palm tree is setting. I'm using the dark again. So I am using a lot of color. I'm just doing the same thing over and over again with just different shades. Taking the very lightest green and I'm going over up there with yellow too, so just to tone it down just a tiny bit. I don't know if you saw it, but I just thought it was just too much focus on the yellow, so. Okay, let's see if you can see the difference. Okay, I think you get the idea. And, you know, if you want to continue, you know, just take pauses and keep working on it until you really like what you see. If you even want more darks in your tree trunk, you can add black as well. I did not use black in any of mine, but if you want your tree to look more silhouetted and like a real night scene, you might want to take some black and add black on the edge and do the same process again. Totally up to you. This one, you can see up close. So see how I did the same exact process. I did a dark line of brown and a dark line of the kind of tan mixed with white, and then I just went back and forth to make it look kind of scratchy. It won't look good if you just do a flat brown, so I don't recommend. You really do need to use a dark and a light to give this tree trunk texture. You don't want it to look flat. The more color the better, the more layers the better. Both of these the pictures are going to be on the lesson plans as well as the detailed steps. And I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, we'll see you next week doing a different medium.